let me tell you a story that happened right here in California, just a few miles away from this very campsite. Many years ago, there was a man. His name was Cain, and he moved to the Bay Area with his wife, Ishi. They were initially from Tokyo. Cain had the most beautiful wife. She was phenomenal. She was loving, she was multi-talented, and she even cooked him his favorite meals from time to time. The neighbors were so jealous of how lucky Cain was. But Cain did not appreciate his good fortune. He said, my wife isn't that great. One day, new neighbors moved next door, and they had a decent-looking daughter named Aiko. In Cain's world, Aiko was the most beautiful woman in the entire universe. So Cain said to himself, how do I get with Aiko and get rid of this issue? On a stormy night in May, Cain put his plan into action. They were attending this banquet hall on a hill. And he said to Ishi, before we go home, why don't we go to the edge of the cliff and look at how high the tides are? Ishi said, oh, that sounds so romantic. Okay. So they went to the edge of the cliff, and as Ishi peered over the ledge, Cain pushed her. No one could even hear her blood-curdling screams as her body smacked into the rocks below. Cain then ran back to the banquet hall, yelling, oh, my wife, she slipped, she fell! And everyone believed him. It wasn't until Cain went home that night and sat in his favorite comfy chair that he toasted to his success. Then he started to fall asleep. Outside, the wind whipped against the house and the walls began to rattle and shake. A sly breeze crept into the room and whispered, vengeance, vengeance. Cain sat upright. He couldn't believe his eyes. In front of him was this woman with long, black, tangled hair over a blood-stained kimono. She whispered yet again, vengeance, vengeance. Cain jumped up faster than a dog could jump for a frisbee and ran to his neighbor's house. They mistook his fear for grief and said, oh, Cain, stay with us. And he said, oh, I will. He stayed with them for an entire month. And seeing no signs of Ishi, he said, now it's time to propose to Aiko. Aiko accepted his proposal, and he took her hand in hand back to his home. They were walking around the garden when he felt a hand on his arm that was colder than his very soul. As he looked in front of him, a beautiful young Ishi appeared and kissed him on the lips. She then whispered in his ear, vengeance, vengeance. She laughed and danced away, stopping for but a moment to wave to Aiko before disappearing into the moonlight. Aiko stared back in a jealous rage. Cain was so worried that Aiko questioned his devotion that he threw her this beautiful feast. Where? At the banquet hall on the hill. Everything was going fine until Cain looked across that room and he saw a beautiful Ishi standing demurely against the wall. To his horror, her body began to change as she laughed. Blood oozed out of every pore of what was left of her being. Her eye popped out of its socket and swayed back and forth, taunting him. He yelled, no, no, no! And the entire room went silent. No one saw Ishi but Cain. Ishi then floated out of the room and along the cliff path stopping at the exact edge where Cain had pushed her. She turned to face him. Her body grew and her eyes glowed with a fierce hatred. She yelled through the wind, "Vengeance! Vengeance!" Cain stepped back in fear and tripped over a branch and plunged over the cliff. His body hit those same rocks below. That same night, lightning struck the top of his house and it burned to the ground. Neighbors say that they could hear a voice in the wind whisper all together now, "Vengeance! Vengeance!" Mr. Toastmaster,